Joining me on the program now from the Maxim Institute, Thomas Scrimgeour. Thomas, kia ora.
Thanks for having me, Andrew.
You into horse racing? Is that your vibe? Is that like a recreational thing on a Saturday afternoon?
I confess to not having much of a history with horse racing. I always did love the horse events in the Olympics,
Oh, yeah.
Mark Todd and the show jumping and all of that. That seems to be, I could get once every 4 years, I had enough interest in horse racing to watch that.
And hey, more of a dressage than a steeplechase guy. That'd be fair, right?
I think so. And as we're talking about political campaigns, perhaps dressage is the name of the game. That is the sport that the politicians are in, trying to dance their steps and move in order.
Yeah, a lot of prancing ponies, it seems. But, I mean, it's also some policy announcements, to be fair. It's seriously, apart from the name calling, actually having some policies that we can compare to say, hey, this party's offering this other party has this totally different strategy. Let's compare which one suits me and my view on politics and the way the world should be. I mean, that's how politics should be. It seems like it's been a while since we've been able to compare apples with apples, or even oranges for that matter.
Yeah, for sure. Though, I guess to be fair to the opposition parties, it was a fairly tough loss for them at the last election. And so they were taking some time to do some soul searching. There was probably internal debates about what was the future of this party. And actually, in opposition, you do have a job opposing or criticizing or evaluating whatever the government of the day is doing. So I think it was reasonable for them to take some time and figure this out and figure it out internally before coming to the New Zealand public. But I think it is a really good sign that we now have some sense of where they're going. So in the last week, Labor started trickling out a few policies and trying to, I guess, start to show their hand for the election to come.
And maybe they should have spent more time in the figuring out stage, honestly, because these policy announcements haven't gone particularly well. We've had a bit of a stumble at the first hurdle with, Chris Hipkins not being aware that a health policy had been announced when it had been announced. And then, of course, the leak of their capital gains policy. Not a great start to the race.
Yeah, certainly it doesn't inspire confidence. I mean, it's worth remembering that when Christopher Luxon took over leadership of the National Party, when they were in the doldrums of opposition, he struggled with a leaking party as well. Yeah. It wasn't all smooth sailing to start with, and then slowly party discipline emerged. And perhaps Chris Hipkins is struggling with that as well. And it must be very frustrating for supporters of it, because challenges with launching the policy and this communications, it's not the same as whether the policy is a good idea or not. The policies stand or fall on their own, but people don't feel filled with confidence. And perhaps him not being aware that the GP policy had been launched may well have been simply a communications error.
Yep.
But having a leak is certainly not a good sign.
And hey, let's get down to the actual policy in just a moment, but it certainly put Chris Hipkins on the back foot that he was not the first person to be talking about this policy on the media because of the leak. The finance minister had the opportunity to rip it to shreds before he could talk about the policy in a more positive light.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're in opposition, you don't want to be on the back foot. You should be able to be on the attack and then also promoting your vision. If you're having to respond to criticisms before you get to sell the vision, you get lost in the weeds. Yep. And most people who aren't following the details of this, they just hear the back and forth and they don't get a chance to see your casting a vision about where you see New Zealand is heading. So I imagine very frustrating for him.
Not a lot of weeds. Can I just say that? Not a lot of details to get lost in on this one. Yes, a capital gains tax. And to be fair, this is a bold move. This is a clear difference between the left and the right in this regard, particularly regarding tax policy. This is the policy that Jacinda Ardern said, I will resign as Prime Minister before we introduce a policy like this. It is a bold point of differentiation, although at best it's capital gains light.
Yeah, and certainly I think there's a risk aversion that is underlying how they've set up their capital gains tax. It is, as you say, something Jacinda Ardern ruled out. and she was incredibly popular at the time, had political capital to spend, and she didn't spend it on a capital gains tax. So perhaps Labor's a little bit scarred from that experience.
Yep.
But it is a relatively minimalist capital gains tax in that it excludes the family home. Most New Zealanders, it's about 66% of New Zealanders live in owner-occupied housing.
Yep.
That is to say, houses excluded from capital gains taxes. So most houses will not be covered by this capital gains tax. And it won't be retrospective. It'll only be on future growth in house prices once they get into power, which is probably fair enough. It doesn't sting people for past decisions. But we haven't actually had significant house price growth in the last 3 years.
Yep.
And so the amount of revenue they generate is a little bit uncertain, I think.
And I suppose that is one of the key parts of it. This is a policy that will take 10 years to see the fruit of. So let's paint the scenario that Labor does get in. They introduce capital gains tax. Before the government gets to see any money from that capital gains tax, chances are we'll have another political cycle. They'll be out in opposition and the policy will be repealed. I mean, this is the challenge of having a short electoral cycle and any long-term policies.
Yeah, for sure. Though I think it's kind of always the challenge that will be there in democratic systems is that parliament can always undo what a previous parliament has done. But I guess the secret for things to endure is that if you get elected over successive elections and things become embedded, it becomes harder to undo them.
Yep.
The best example of this is that when John Key was campaigning to become prime minister, he described working for families as socialism by stealth. He was sort of incredibly scathing of it.
Yep.
And then he was a popular prime minister for 9 years and never removed it. So he came in with this incredibly harsh criticism, but couldn't bring himself or didn't focus on it, or for whatever reason, it survived his entire tenure as prime minister. So the National Party will be very, very loudly opposing this. If Labour were to win and were to hang around for a couple of terms, National may find it hard to say no to the money when they get into power themselves. Removing a tax does lessen the amount of cash the government has to play with. So some things stick around.
As you mentioned, though, there's a lot of get out of jail or get out of tax clauses here that for most people it won't apply because it's just the family home. Because of what's happening in the housing market at the moment, the days are gone where it's like, oh, you buy a house, you flick it in a couple of months, you make $100,000 profit. That is not the housing market at the moment. If people were just to say, hey, let's put our investment properties in a family trust and bank the rental income or use it to pay our mortgage, they're not paying capital gains. And honestly, they've got quite a few years to get their tax accountants to sort out a system where they're not paying tax. It could cost more to administer than it generates an income, even in the medium to long term.
Certainly, there is a lot of complexity with capital gains taxes, and they're going to run into these challenges as well with if they're going to exclude farms. Well, there are a bunch of lifestyle blocks that probably run a couple of dozen cows, and where do they sit? And so there will be this complexity. It probably won't be so complex that it costs more than it brings in, but it does add lots of challenges, and people will find all sorts of ways to try and avoid paying it. But I think Labour would probably say that they have a long-term vision for this. It's not about whether it raises revenue in the short term, but a kind of a structural shift to where we get tax revenue from. And I expect, they're not announcing this, but I expect this is get a capital gains tax across the line kind of policy that can be expanded later. Yep. It's much easier to creep the size of the thing once it's there, but introducing something brand new can have a lot of uncertainty for voters. So go with something small that they may plan on building in the future.
And hey, to be fair, most other countries in the world have a form of capital gains tax, and there are people in New Zealand who are earning income that's not being taxed. And I suppose fairness is a key value for a lot of Kiwis. So maybe this will prove to be more popular at the election than the first appearance of it. But hey, we wait and see. The games are underway. The race is on. Thomas, thanks for your insight and your commentary. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Andrew.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.